Tuning in. I'm Rob Kwan here with Ross Wasseroffer, and apologies that we had to cancel and repeatedly delay our open meeting and are just doing that with us. But every single time we tried to do that, at least half of the city was in red flag warnings. But we are thankfully in a better place and happy to look back at this November 2024 election data. We are going to go over some background, let you know how to navigate the spreadsheet we've put together, look at some turnout and demographic information about the city of LA so that we can kind of put these races into context, and then look at close to 20 different races from president to local measures and see if we can find some takeaways there, and we'll get right into it. Our goal here is to better understand the diverse electorates of each council district. Get an idea of which council members are out of step with their community, or why certain council members might be being pulled in a certain direction. See what issues those council districts feel strongly about, how that varies across the city. That, this can inform how you might want to tailor your messaging to a local council district, and get an idea of, who speaks the loudest when it comes to votes at City Hall, because as you will see, we do not have anywhere near equal representation on some of these issues, and we have a very, skewed electorate that's participating. And it's always interesting to see amongst our 15 council members, as much as they vote in lockstep and in unanimity a lot of times, what the spectrum is across the left, right, and center. And this is all just very helpful to read some tea leaves and figure out what might be driving these things. What other research or reading can you do out there? We always plug Rafe Sonnenschein's book. And going through this data, there were many a times where I was thinking back to sections on that, talking about cycles from 20, 30 years ago that are still highly, highly relevant to understanding this stuff in front of us. Data, whether it's from the census, registration, income, unemployment, educational attainment, age, there's just a lot to glean here. For the city of Los Angeles, we have some really unique dynamics. We have long ballots with many measures. Not everywhere in the country do you get direct democracy where people are actually voting on changing laws. We have nonpartisan elections. So, when somebody appears on the ballot, there's no D or R next to their name. And those cues are really important for voters. So taking that out of the picture changes things. We don't have primaries for parties. It's all open. There's no labels there. Even if we did have labels, they're not clean indicators. And as you move from president, it's pretty, easy to figure out who's going to likely vote for who. But as you move down ballot, you have very, very, very different dynamics when you come to controversial issues like homelessness, development, law enforcement. You can get some really, really weird, wonky changes in voters' preferences, where you have somebody that previously voted for Bernie Sanders and is very anti-war, wants to tax the rich, but at the same time they resonate with somebody like Tracy Park because of her approach to homelessness, or her approach to issues like law enforcement. So you can have voters driven by very, very different, issues across the board, and it really does change a lot as you move downward. We have a large, large number of voters that aren't registered with any party. So that makes things a little bit harder to use just the simple red-blue representation. Within our council districts, you also have a lot of diversity. And here our focus is looking at council districts, but you got roughly 260,000 people in those things. And you really do have to look more at a neighborhood level to get a closer, more granular understanding of, how to read some of these things. Because if you look at a district like District 14, you have some really progressive areas. And then at the same time, you've got places like Eagle Rock and downtown LA, which have very, very different kind of skews to them. We have, a really large, sprawling city There are local kind of dynamics. If you go up towards the East Valley and Monica Rodriguez's district, there are horses everywhere. That's a little bit of an overstatement, but you really do have unique communities. When you go down to the harbor, they are very much, set apart from the city. They're attached by a shoestring. So there are different kind of unique perspectives that you get from those pockets. If you compare those East LA or East Valley voters, the Latinos in Councilmember Rodriguez's district, they're very, very different than the Latino voters in Councilmember Soto Martinez and Hernandez's district. We have a significant Jewish community in the city of Los Angeles. They used to be connected all in one district in CD5. And in this last redistricting cycle, there was a concrete effort to separate them entirely, and in part because they are two distinct communities of interest. As you kind of look from more the basin end, Miracle Mile towards Westwood, Cheviot Hills, that's very, very different from the folks up in Encino and Sherman Oaks, let's say. And in the city of Los Angeles, we just have some wild inequality, that some of that reinforced by, historical redlining. And that just makes things very, very different. Even though you're talking about one district to another, they might just have night and day kind of situations. And why might we look at this? And we've done polling on things like council expansion. People can do polls. They don't vote. Votes go through the actual campaign process, and that's something that you can't discredit. Another reason is, we did Fair Rep LA Coalition did some polling on council expansion and ranked choice voting, and you know, one of the issues we ran into there was that even though we had a large sample, if you're looking at each of the 15 council districts, there's just not statistically enough people there to make a reliable read. So the actual kind of geographical breakdown that we got was 3 districts a piece. So we could tell what, the West Valley was like. We could tell what the East Side was like, but we couldn't look at it at a council district level. Just some caveats on what we're talking about here. This is helpful. And it kind of I've worked on field campaigns in places from Las Vegas to Brooklyn to all across the city of LA, from the West Side to the Valley. And it's cool to just see how unique communities really do differ, and how they approach issues, but also just how they approach somebody coming to their door and randomly knocking on it. And at the same time, like we're voters make decisions for a number of reasons. And knocking on doors, one of the things I ran into a lot of time was people who maybe already voted. And you ask them, if you don't mind me asking, who'd you vote for? And they say, honestly, I don't remember. And they're being completely genuine. They might have put their ballot in a couple weeks ago. And even though that council race was at the top of the ballot because it was a special or something, or even though it was a presidential election between Obama and McCain, they really don't remember. And a lot of times people might say, thank you. I was actually going to vote for the other person. I'd never heard about your candidate. If somebody doesn't hear your argument or your case or your issue, then they're not really able to kind of fully weigh in there. And that's just something that you got to keep in mind, because a big struggle with some races is there is an interest out there, whether it be the Democratic Party or the Sierra Club, that's weighed in and said, this is our candidate. That can be really powerful for people that support those organizations who don't have any real understanding of the issue. And they're just like, all right, well, the Democratic Party said this is the Democrat. And they might not think there are other Democrats because they're used to thinking about elections with having only one Democrat making a run. So just a lot to consider. We don't know exactly what pulled the voter one way or the other. This is a snapshot in time. And as we saw Prop 36, steamroll through, that's a very, very different sentiment from voters than they had about 10 years ago. So, voters change and evolve, and you can't necessarily say, hey, because they voted this way in 2024, they're going to go the other way in 2026. In part because we have different turnout, whether you're putting something on the ballot in the presidential cycle or the midterms. So when we're voting for mayor, there's not nearly as many people weighing in as when we vote for president. And in the primary, there's far fewer people voting than in the general. Measures can be really, really, really confusing and overwhelming for voters. And that's partially what makes it hard to know what drove them. You can look at Measure G, the county board expansion. It's hard to know, was it board expansion that got them, or was it the county executive, or was it the participatory budgeting, or was it the ethics commission? What hung them up? They might have liked all of those things, but they didn't like the language on not having a fiscal impact. Who knows? Um, and Measure G is a good example of this. Not all measures receive a submission of support or opposition. Now we have, thanks to the California Clean Money Campaign, the Ballot Disclose Act, which has the supporters and opponents of measures, not just in the little booklet that we get, but on the ballot itself. And for whatever reason, there were some hiccups in getting the supporters listed for Measure G, and that was left blank. So some people were looking at Measure G and saw, hey, there are these community organizations that oppose this, and there's nobody supporting it. I don't know. Um, there's also a huge variation in what receives attention and money. One of the measures we're not going to talk about here is FF, which was some weird wonky thing with fire and police pensions. And the only real coverage of it that came out was opposition from the LA Times editorial board. And I can guarantee you that if our financial situation and how bad it was became clear months earlier, not only would we have seen more opposition, but that might not have even gone on the ballot. So there can just be huge variations in actual money spent on some of these measures, and the extent to which any voters might really be aware of what's at stake. As you move downward, you have a smaller electorate. So it might be tempting to say, hey, this many people turned out for president. That's how many people vote. We have, roughly 10% less sticking around for the down ballot measures. And again, these are just tea leaves. We're trying to glean. Can't be sure. Nothing conclusive here, but at a minimum, this is a really helpful relative indicator. And as we look back and kind of compare these races, you can see, why things fall the way they do, as far as why District 13 is oftentimes on the left and District 12 is not. And it's at the completely opposite end of things. And you can try to identify what might explain some of the shifts in support that we see on different measures. What we are working with from the origin is the raw data from the county. And in addition to the page they have that has the clean county-wide results, they have a number of lengthy PDFs, some of them in the hundreds of pages, some of them in the thousands of pages, that you can sift through to see the election results from different varying levels. This is the primary one that I was working off of, but to get all of the data we have in the spreadsheet together, had to work through about 4 of them, just to be able to see what the county results were, LAUSD results. And as you can see on the screen, this is really, really bare bones, and it's not to knock on the county. It's thousands of pages of work, and it takes some extra work to do the calculations on percentages. But we really just have the raw numbers of ballots cast, registration, the yeses and nos, how many of them came through mail, and that's it. And on the county's website, you can, if you're looking for this, hop over there and you can see the statements of votes cast, see votes cast by district, votes cast by precinct, as well as by community and council district. Um, so those offer you some different ways to look at all of the data from the county. And I what you're about to see is kind of a multi-layered look at things, and everything has been dramatically enhanced by the contributions of Ross. And he has plugged this stuff into Data Wrapper, and wanted to just give you a minute to give a really quick plug on what that is. And yeah.
Thank you, Rob. Very briefly, Data Wrapper is a fantastic no-code tool that takes data and allows you to project it onto different categories in maps, producing a kind of paint by numbers effect that then lets you create an interactive map. And I'm glad that we have the chance to then very easily visualize that data and walk through it with you together and allow you to take a look at those maps yourself in the sheet Rob has shared whenever you so desire. So looking forward to doing just that.
Good stuff. And we are hoping at our next meeting in February to do a teach-in on Data Wrapper and how you can do this stuff for your own purposes. And just to review, there are some things in the spreadsheet that we will not be talking about, not because they're not important, but in the interest of time. One of them is FF, which I mentioned. There are also a couple city measures, HH and II, which got really high support. Um, but hard to really glean too much from it, given it was kind of a hodgepodge of random charter reforms housed in two different trench coats. So it's just a little tough to read anything on there. The LAUSD measure is definitely interesting from a taxation perspective, and seeing that LAUSD supported the measure more strongly than the city of LA, definitely fascinating. But nonetheless, to get to the goods, the page you're looking for can be found at bit.ly/24BYCD, 24 by council district, just to get it plugged in your head. And that page will take you to a spreadsheet where you can sift through a number of tabs. Most of the sheets look like the one that's sitting in front of you. On the left side, you can see what the individual council district breakdown is, and that includes, percentages. It also includes turnout for the individual council district. Um, and this is turnout on this specific item. So for this one, this is the US Senate race, the full term. There were two separate questions. This one is just a little bit more reliable. There was a little bit drop off on the other one, just kind of ignoring it. You can see the city of LA breakdown as well as LA County with the city of LA removed. And then you can also, where relevant, see California. Next to that, you can see the strongest support for the item, in this case, Senator Schiff. And you can see that broken down in order, as well as, for your quick reference, the city of LA, LA County, and California. And then to the right of that, you can see Ross's goodness with the live map. That is a static map in the spreadsheet, but you can click on that link and find a zoomable interactive map where if you hover over a district, you see the exact number. Uh, Lots of good stuff there. So just to get into the city of LA demographics a little bit, this is from December 2001 or 2021, sorry, when we were redistricting, and you can see the population levels in each council district and the deviation. There's also breakdowns of the percent for race population, percent voting age population. But what you really want to look to is the last column, percent citizen voting age population. and this is uh, people who are citizens and of voting age. And you can look at places like Council District 9 and see that there's a much larger African American population for citizen voting age population. A district that used to be a whole lot more black, that has gotten an influx and a huge change in what it looks like. However, because a lot of that population is immigrant, not necessarily citizen, and a significant number of them under 18, they have a much smaller pie to work with there. This is also from around the census, and this is just using Districtor, which was the mapping tool they had back then. And this allows you to see the kind of weighting for population density for the Latino population, the white population, Asian, and Black population. And for the Latino population, you kind of see that density in the East Valley that is growing out west. And that's in part why you see that little middle area in the West Valley where there was an attempt to create a Latino district in the last redistricting cycle. You can also see how with the white population, we've got bands in the hills where there's just a strong lockdown. For our Asian population, you can see everything up from Eagle Rock. Council District 1 has our most significant Asian population. Council District 10, over there in the middle, you can see the Koreatown area. But also our second highest Asian population is actually in Council District 12. So up there in the Northwest Valley, you can see that peeking out. Um, we also have a decent Asian population growing on the west side as well. And for our Black population, you can see the real stronghold is in Council District 8, but dips up into 10, 9, a little in 14, but you also have to account for District 15. Councilmember McCosker is where you have Watts that is connected via the shoestring to the rest of the district. Historically underserved by the local council member, but Councilmember McCosker is actually doing a lovely job and just loves the hell out of the 1-5. And he has somehow managed to bridge the shoestring. The partisan breakdown of our city council districts can also be seen here. There's pretty nearly every single council district has a majority Democrats. The only exceptions being Bloomingfield and Lee, ever so slightly. The Republican registration varies all the way up from Lee, where it's at a quarter, and you have some districts where it's in the low single digits. And with the independent, and independent is not really independent. There is a American Independent Party, which is kind of racist. That is just in place of nonpartisan and also inclusive of all of the other third parties there in that column on your right. Um, and I believe I did not include the maps that you put together on this. I totally forgot about it. But on the spreadsheet, you can see the demographics tab where Ross has some really great maps there, representing the distribution of partisan registration via Democrat, Republican, and other. So, looking at our presidential turnout, we have a huge variation here. And our whiter, older, wealthier communities, this is nothing novel that we're identifying here, turn out higher. Interesting to see just how stark that is. Council District 5 turning out at over 76%, whereas Council District 9 is just barely over 40%. So you have nearly twice the turnout in Councilmember Yaroslavsky's district. And it's important as we go through all of this data to remember that the percentages can be a little bit misleading because that only tells you half the story. You want to be cognizant of votes and the net votes. How many votes did Adam Schiff, you know, how many more votes did he win than he lost in that district? That's an important thing to keep in mind. Also, want to understand that you have very, very different levels of voter registration in these districts. So, Councilmember Price is below 100,000, whereas Councilmember Rahman has 180,000. So, just a hugely different um, composition of the voters that you got going on there. And as a result, you can see that some of these things compound as far as the problems. You have a smaller population that's registering to vote, and they're also turning out at a lower rate. Our top six congressional or council districts, and that is just Yaroslavsky, Park, Rahman, Lee, Blumenfield, and Nazarian, produced a majority of all votes in the city, which is just kind of wild. Um, Three council districts with the highest turnout cast 40,000 more votes than the five council districts with the lowest turnout. So just Yaroslavsky Park Ramen had more votes produced by 40,000 than five council districts. So those communities are definitely speaking a bit louder than some of the rest in the city. And council member or council district 9 is significantly, an outlier. We have low turnout in district 8, but by nearly double digits in council district 10, sitting below it. And just to kind of put some of that into context when it comes to raw votes, nearly 3 times the total votes in council district 5 than in council district 9. So just a very, very different kind of world you're living in there as far as representation goes. And just kind of comparing the city of LA with the county, we're not too far behind them, but the LA County has historically been a lagging county as far as voting in the state of California, and we're sitting about um, a little under 6% below there. Looking at the turnout by race and measure, um, just a note, this is, individually by race. If you were just looking at turnout in general, looking at like who filled out a ballot, that's a very different number. This presidential turnout does not include people who left their votes blank because they were unhappy with the candidates there or did an invalid write-in. And there was only one, valid write-in in the state, and I didn't see any votes for them in LA County, so I don't know what the situation is there. But you can't write in some states. If you write in Bernie Sanders, they will count that. That is not the case in the state of California. So there was about a 1% drop off from total turnout to the presidential turnout. One thing we can see here is, the California propositions definitely get more attention from voters than measures down the ballot. They're just as confusing and weird and have campaigns for and against than some of our other races, but it does appear that for whatever reason, we get a whole lot more voter participation in those things than we do for our city and county measures. You kind of roughly see LA City Council races having a drop off of around 5 to 6% from the presidential turnout. And when you get to the measures, that can be near double digits. And just to flag, some of these numbers in here are for LAUSD items, and only looking at LA City voters for those purposes there. For our turnout, you can see working from the presidential to the state prop to the DA to the county and city measures, just the subtle drop off in voter turnout. And party turnout, we have a very different kind of world here. We are in a city that is majority Latino, but white people still make up the biggest chunk of the electorate, just under 50%. And then you can see the numbers broken down through a number of ways. On the upper left, this is a chart screenshotted from PDI's ballot tracker. And you can find a link to that in the spreadsheet. And you can see just the differences in turnout where, people registered to a party are more likely to turn out than those not, or registered to a third party. You can see the population over 65 voting at a significantly higher rate than our younger voters. And then just to kind of see the raw numbers of, participation, white people are turning out higher. And as a result, they made up 54% of the electorate for president. 28% for Latinos, just under 10% for Asian, and 7.7% for African American. On the right side, you can see PDI's map, and some of this can be a little deceiving. Like you see that red square, not a square, but that red blob in the valley there. That is the Sepulveda Basin. There are no houses or apartments there, but people can register to vote with an intersection. So there are places like that or Griffith Park where it might be red, but it's really just one registered voter turned out, and that's why it looks skewed. But those areas that are red had more Republican voters than anybody else. Those that are blue were blue, and you can see the different shading there to kind of represent, softer preference for Republicans or Democrats. This is just helpful to get a feel for how things kind of pan out geographically. You can see up in the valley, in the northeast, where Councilmember Rodriguez district is, that is that hillside, Sunland, Tahunga, people got horses, different kind of world out there. You can see in the hillside areas in District 12 gets a little more conservative. Same for District 3. And moving all the way down to Wilmington and San Pedro, you can see the kind of variation that we have across the city. For presidential preferences, Council District 8 and 10 were up top with the strongest support for Kamala Harris. Districts 11 and 13 not far behind. And that's just notable because, we're really seeing the partisan red-blue dynamic kind of prevail here in that Council District 11, which is not one you would identify as one of the leftier districts out there, is right up at the top. For Donald Trump, he had some strong performances, relatively speaking, in Council Districts 12, 7, and 3. Interesting to see just kind of how things panned out across the city. You actually had slightly higher support for Donald Trump in Council Districts 14 and District 1 than you did in Tracy Park's district, which is kind of wild to think about, but it's not at all fair to say that there are more Trump voters in those districts than in Tracy Park's, because there were more than 10,000 votes netted for Donald Trump in District 11 than the others. So just something to keep in mind. For our third parties, you're not seeing too much variation there, but there definitely is a greater openness to third parties on the east side, and the smallest openness towards casting that protest vote was in districts 5 and 8, really strong traditional Democratic districts. So not hugely surprising there. For the Senate race, Adam Schiff performed better than Kamala Harris in every single district except for Council District 11. important to note that only two options were on the ballot for Senate. So there was no third party candidates, nothing like that to pull votes away. So it's not a clean comparison when you're looking at Senate and president, but they didn't really vary too much. Um, One thing that was really fascinating to see is Steve Garvey was, a long shot attempt at getting a Republican in there. And he overperformed versus Trump in every single district. Not a huge surprise, but it was really striking to see how much better he did than Donald Trump in districts 11 and 5, our West Side districts with Yaroslavsky and Park. And you can just see there, around like two, three times as many votes in those districts as far as the people voting for Garvey that presumably did not for Trump. So if you're looking for the home of the never Trumpers, people who are really Republicans but aren't willing to throw their vote behind Donald Trump, there's a lot of them in District 11 and 5. Um, the biggest gains for Adam Schiff compared to Kamala Harris, districts 10, 13, 1, 14, 2. I just want to flag, I was in District 1 and I left my Senate race blank. I was not pleased with Adam Schiff. So I just left it blank. So there, again, there can be all kinds of reasons that there's some sort of variation. Um, and the turnout overall was slightly smaller than the presidential race by about 3 points. For district attorney, this is Nathan Hockman's victory over the incumbent George Gascon. And areas outside of LA County or the city of LA went for Hockman 63. Sorry, am I reading that right? My brain's frying right now. Anyways, oh shit, I'm reading this entirely wrong. Anyways, point being, Nathan Hockman did way, way, way better in areas outside of the city of LA than he did in the city of LA itself. The only ones that Gascon won were districts 13, 1, 10, 14, and 8. But it is notable to just see, there's been some reactions to the Gascon loss as far as, what does this mean for Karen Bass or, somebody running against Heidi Feldstein Soto? We have a very different city than we do compared to the rest of the county. And districts like District 9, 2, and 4 were right on the bubble as far as potentially going the other way and voting for Gascon. And if you had a better candidate running a real campaign, could have easily won a majority of our council districts. Uh, Not saying he could have beat Nathan Hockman in this kind of dynamic, but just notable that there were a surprising number of districts that were on the bubble. And if you read somebody, there was a huge campaign tying Nithya Raman to George Gascon when she was in the primary in March. And you just look at this and how effective was that? Who knows? Measure G, this is the county board expansion, creation of elected executive. This is a race where the city of Los Angeles was really, really essential. It failed in the areas outside of the city of LA, passed everywhere except for District 12, narrowly passed in districts 15, 7, and 3. For 6 of our council districts, it won by a range of 20 to 33 points, won by double digits in 11 council districts. And mentioned the net votes a few times here, and this kind of illustrates it well. District 4, Councilmember Raman's district, was in the middle of the pack, seventh highest in support, but it actually produced more net votes in support of Measure G than any other council district. And Council District 11, where Councilmember Park is, produced margin 4.7 thousand more votes uh, in than in Council District 9. So just something to think of as far as, areas where we need to grow, but also how important it is to make sure, you hold down some of those big districts because they add up. How does this maybe kind of factor into all of the thoughts about council expansion? On the one hand, this was an absurdly ambitious measure. When it comes to city council, there's been a lot of talk about maybe moving from 15 to 21 or 25. Not really other than council member Rahman and Gerardo, you're not hearing anybody on the council say, let's double it. We doubled the board and added a new elected executive. So this is pretty big. At the same time, the status quo is very different. Moving from 5 to 9 is very different than moving from 15 to 25. So, you know, maybe voters have a sweet spot for 15, and that's a magic number. And if we go any higher than 15, there's diminishing returns for this. I'm making stuff up, but I just want to give the benefit of the doubt. Another thing to keep in mind, there's some heavy sweetener thrown in there. We had the creation of an ethics commission. So, that could have pulled some voters across the finish line too. There's been some thought about putting council expansion on the 2026 ballot because we refrained from doing it this year. There will be a smaller electorate in the mayoral race. So that's just something to keep in mind as far as trying to understand how this might translate to a different election cycle. No matter what, a lot of our elected officials have said, my constituents don't care about this. People don't want more politicians. And this does really undermine that argument and show that not only do people, want a different government, even if it means more politicians, but people in the city of LA are strongly open to that idea. Um, Council districts 15, this is one that is connected by that shoestring. And if you had a more right-sized council district, you would be able to, keep Watts in a coherent community where they're not stuck with people who live far, far away. So there's been a lot of interest in that area as far as council expansion addressing that situation. So there's room for growth there. Council districts 3 and 12, these are weak areas as far as support, and a lot of work needs to be done there. But there are a lot of folks in the valley who are not happy with City Hall, and the fact that you have these huge districts very, very far from City Hall affects representation there. And my council member, her district wraps around City Hall. So it's not a long commute for them to move around the district and be back at the office. Very, very different in districts 12 and 3. So those are areas where we're weak, where it would probably be wise to do a lot of the groundwork and build up local support. With voters, that is. Work with the council members is needed in some of these areas where they are not reflective of the kind of vibe of their constituents. And that would be council districts 1, 13, 8, and 2. And Councilmember Nazarian, as a candidate, has said he supports expansion. Always got to take that with a grain of salt because Councilmember Harris Dawson and Soto Martinez and Hernandez have all previously said they supported it. So I just highlight these because these are all areas where the measure did very, very well, where the member is out of step with their constituents. So this is at least something to point to and make them think about. 4 out of our 5 members on the rules committee, their council district supported it by double digits. And my screen is cut off at the bottom, so I can't even read that. At 3 out of the 5, it was by 20 points or more. So a majority of the Rules Committee had their constituents overwhelmingly support these measures. And I am grateful to be able to hand it off to you, Ross. Measure A.
No problem. Go ahead and get some water if you need to, Rob, while I take things over. Hi, everyone. Just to go ahead and recap, Measure A sought to replace a quarter-cent sales tax that voters approved in March 2017 that was due to expire in 2027 with a half-cent sales tax. The county was moving quickly to try to make sure no less than $1 billion in funding didn't go poof. And as it turned out, that was a very good idea. City turnout for this measure was almost 59%. It was one of the county measures with the highest city turnout, just slightly more than the DA's race at 57% or Measure G at around 54%. And people were really engaged with this measure. As Rob was saying, there's usually a huge drop off between the federal races and more local races. And so next time you're filling out that ballot, just imagine when you flip your ballot, you're just losing so many people. But here, the difference in turnout was usually just 4 to 5 percentage points per council district, or about 7,000 people per district. And there's much more turnout here compared to Measure G by 3 to 5 points, with council districts 4, 5, 11, and 12 over at the west end at the high end. It's difficult to say if that's just a ballot flip as well, or if people in those districts were just substantially more interested in participating around issues of homelessness compared to issues of county expansion. But I think that's still substantial considering that all of those districts I just listed are also among the largest districts when it comes to voter turnout. When it comes to support for this measure in the city, that's about 65%. That's 6 points higher than the county as a whole and accounts for about a 4 point bump across the county, with county vote around 58%. And it was just overwhelmingly popular with majority support everywhere except Council District 12. And I think considering just how difficult it is to get sometimes even majority support for a measure, I think it's pretty incredibly notable that at least 2/3 support came out of council districts in and around, especially the urban core of the city, council districts 1, 2, 8, 9, 10, 13, and 14, often areas that are experiencing as well some of the most visible homelessness. Now, I hoped to give you all a little bit of a historical analysis and try to do a one-to-one comparison across council districts compared to some of the past measures related to homelessness. But unfortunately, all I learned from trying to do that is that trying to tell stories across elections is tough at the best of times, let alone when you're trying to drill down into council districts, because not only are the circumstances of elections so different year to year, but of course, our council districts have changed. But I still think that there is something to be learned from trying to at least ask some questions about what happened with these past propositions. In November 2016, City Prop Measure HHH tried to pass a homeless services bond of 1.2 billion, and that received at the time a yes vote of over 77% versus, of course, for Measure A, 64% in the city today. But what I will say is that, again, the electorate has expanded. Measure A still received almost 100,000 votes more than Measure HHH back in November 2016. That measure also needed a 2/3 vote in order to pass, which totally could have influenced campaigning, really juiced it. This Measure A, of course, is a response to and trying to update County Measure H from March 2017. The problem, again, is how can you really compare those elections as a special election? City turnout in that for Measure H back in 2017 was low at only 21% of registered voters. But even then, the city vote for Measure H in March 2017 was around 71%. That's still a loss of about 7 percentage points or so compared to today. But at the same time, I will note that ultimately, I think if you try to thread the years and the elections, you see that the drop off when it comes to really high support for homelessness measures and measures to try to raise funds to combat homelessness is still incredibly high. I think other ballot measures, like again, Measure G, would be absolutely kill to get the kind of success that Measure A got in this election. Rob, if you could just turn now the
Yeah,
slide
and
to Measure
I would just
DD.
note
But before we move
this
on,
was
some comments.
Yeah, just this was one of the rare local measures that had a very vigorous campaign on the ballot this fall. For the city measures, there was a little bit of money spent on the redistricting items, but not much else otherwise. There was a little bit of money spent on Measure G, but nothing like Measure A. So there was a lot of engagement on this issue in particular. And I just think it's kind of I was definitely surprised to see people were not only willing to double down on the tax, but to bump it up. It just kind of goes to show, um, you know, people are in the city in particular, uh, way more invested in like trying to find some solutions, even if they really do question the effectiveness of the first go around.
Thank you, and absolutely agreed. I was pretty surprised myself when I started to dig into those numbers. And just to recap measures DD and LL, DD establishes an independent redistricting commission for the city of Los Angeles, and LL does the same for LA Unified School District, and both winning with an incredibly high rate in the city of almost 3/4%. And for turnout, it is also wildly more popular than almost any other county measure or elected office. Measure G scores low by comparison, and this is 3 points above even Adam Schiff's Senate race. And as you saw, he is very popular. For city turnout, it's about 55%, and that's a drop of about 10% compared to the presidency, loss of about 200,000 voters, but it's about the same turnout as County Measure G. That being said, the difference between support comparing Measure DD with Measure GG is sometimes, like I mentioned, in the double digits, but with just not double digits, sorry. There's just a little more turnout for County Measure G than DD in Council Districts 7, and just a little more turnout for Measure DD in Council District 4. But when it comes to the actual results, the yes votes, the difference between support is sometimes in the double digits, with over 20-point increase in support in CDs 4 and 5 and 11, and 18-point increases in support in CDs 2, 3, and 12 compared to Measure G. Let's see, and just seeing these huge jumps is fantastic to see, and again, just indicates incredibly strong support for the necessary reforms that will allow for independent redistricting in the city. If you could just skip ahead to Measure LL, Rob. See. Again, turnout only really, but comparing turnout between DD and LL, we're really only just losing a few people, just a percentage point, which makes sense since LAUSD is just not always on the tops of people's minds. But those who did vote were more enthusiastic about LL, with yes votes increasing compared to Measure DD by, on average, about 2 points, and up by 3 points compared to Measure DD in CDs 10, 14, and 15, and that's increasing up to 4 points in CDs 8 and 9. Rob, was there anything else you wanted to add regarding DD and LL?
Uh, just thought it was weird that there was slightly lower support in the areas of LAUSD that are outside of the city of LA. We've got about 3/4 of a million people that are within LAUSD, but not a part of city of LA. And the idea that they would prefer the status quo is just kind of bizarre. And I don't really know what to make of that other than there's a lot of reluctance and skepticism towards City Hall and its control over LAUSD and that kind of weird partnership we have under our charter. So I really don't know what to make of that, but either way, it had extremely strong support. Yeah. Measure ER. This was our ethics reforms for the city of LA. We've had an ethics commission for 30 plus years, and this is the first comprehensive update to its powers and independence. Um, at least 2/3 of voters supported this measure in every single council district. Even in the weaker districts, it actually had slightly better performance than the redistricting measures, which was notable. This was also the lowest turnout of any measure, which, as a big ethics fanboy, hurt me. Um, I for the kind of strongholds and support, you see that in the east side in that kind of cluster of districts, um, 1, 13, 14. But you also see, the center part of LA, the west side, and the south of the valley, all really, really, really gung-ho about this measure. Um, Also notable that council districts 13 and 1 are single-handedly the two strongest, biggest supporters of these measures, and overwhelmingly won there. 83, 81%. I mean, like, you don't see a whole lot win with those kind of margins, yet those two council members, Soto Martinez and Hernandez, moved to gut the measure before it got on the ballot. Just something that I will definitely be keeping in mind as we come back to these conversations, City Hall. Um, Prop 3, this is on the constitutional right to marry regardless of sex or race. Um, not long ago, 2008, the city of Los Angeles, I don't know how it voted on Prop 8, but California and LA County were not down. And This overturned that support by an average of 44 points, roughly 20 points above the state average. All 15 council districts supported it, the weakest with an 18-point spread, the strongest with a 65-point spread. So this was something that was overwhelmingly successful. Councilmember Park is at the top spot. But this is the only instance that we see that in any of these kind of results. This is one of those issues where, even though some of the other districts are a bit more, in our traditional understanding, progressive, like the gay rights issue is just not something that is in the city of Los Angeles, a red-blue issue in the same way, or has that kind of relevance. So we see really, really strong support in um some of these wider, wealthier areas, like districts 5 and 11, in part because some of the reservation with gay marriage has come from, Latino and African American communities. And you see Price and Harris Dawson much further on the chart than we usually see them. This is really, fascinating to just see the differences in support here. Also interesting to see that Councilmember Lee was not in the bottom. And Councilmember McCosker and Rodriguez were. And I think that might be in part because of the larger Latino population in both districts, but in particular the population in Watts and McCosker's district. Notably weaker support in 8, 9, 10, and 15, as I mentioned. This was also the least progressive positioning for Council District 10. And for, CD8, this was the second lowest. So very, very interesting to just see how this issue played out. On that note, as far as looking back at Prop 8 and those previous races Ross mentioned, there is a way to look at the precinct data and mess with stuff and take our council districts that we have currently and apply it to that data. But that is way, way, way above my abilities, and you need to find somebody super savvy to do that. But it is possible. Prop 4, this was on bonds for water, wildlife, and climate risks. So this is just interesting in its own to see some sort of environmental issue on the ballot and get a read for that. City of LA supported it much more strongly than California. Um, all of them by double digits, 14 out of 15 by 24 points plus. Significantly weaker support in the Valley, West Side, and Council District 15. There are some districts where, there's just going to be reservations about anything that's going to increase cost of living, taxes, whatever. Prop 5, this failed. This was changing the housing bonds voting threshold, making it easier to build public housing. Again, this failed, but it won overwhelmingly in the city of LA by nearly 18 points, and a huge drop off at the county level, where it won by just 2 points. Just narrowly fails in council districts 3 and 7, but failed big in council district 12. So, council districts 11 and 15 support by 13 plus points. You can just kind of see who's on the bubble. And this in some ways matches up with, areas where there's just reservations and opposition to public housing, affordable housing. And, this is, even though it failed, it offers at least an interesting look at openness to this kind of thing. Prop 6 is on involuntary servitude. And this is one where, again, like there were a lot of people who supported the intent of this measure that were confused by the ballot language. And can't read a ton into it, but it definitely is worth taking a look at. It failed statewide, but passed the city by 22-point margin. The only district to reject it was District 12. So just very, very some weird kind of results in here. Like, you see Councilmember Park a bit higher up than you might expect, Yaroslavsky as well, but there's I think that there's at least on that west side area, there's a pretty solid ecosystem of overkill Dem clubs. And there is a way for at least your kind of like regular seasoned voter to at least know of this issue and the way they should maybe vote. Prop 32, this failed statewide. This would have raised the minimum wage. It won the city of LA overwhelmingly by 22 points. CD 12, District 12 was the only one to reject it, and it did so by a pretty big margin, by double digits. This is, was a surprise for some folks to see the first minimum wage measure and for forever fail, but at least we held it down in the city of LA. Prop 33, this was on local governmental rent control, also failed. It nearly won in the city of LA, but failed statewide by 20%. Very, very, very strong opposition in the west side of the city, stretching from the valley all the way downward. So districts 12, 11, 3, 5, all just very, very strongly against this thing. The only two valley council districts to support it were council districts 2 and 6. Both of them having a pretty significant renting population. And I believe this might have been the measure with the most even split amongst the council, as far as roughly half of them being for and against. Prop 36, this was a big one, changing law regarding felony charges, increased sentences for certain crimes. All but 2 council districts supported it. The only ones to oppose it were districts 10 and 13. Very, very, very strong support for this thing in the Valley in particular. And that's something you can see clearly on the map, how well it did in the valley and how well it did down in District 15. Um, Surprisingly, did very strong in District 9, which blew my mind because George Gascon came 1 point short of winning District 9, while Prop 36 wins by over 22 points. I don't know how to compute that and make sense of it, but it was definitely fascinating. And you can look over at districts 4, 5, and 11, and they honestly, for the extent to which people in those districts scream about crime, and make that an issue online and on campaigns and with politicians, not necessarily reflective and where they ended up as far as being the most strongly in support of Prop 36. Councilmember Park is in eighth spot, Yaroslavsky 9. Raman is barely in support. Like it could have easily, with a different campaign, pulled that district down there. So just a lot of results here, even though you have different issues related to criminal justice, that like there's just some variation there, which fascinating. There is a chart at the end of the spreadsheet that compares everything. Handy if you're just trying to look, compare one race to the other or get an eyeball. You can control F and search and pull up the name if you want to look up your council member or one you hate and just see where they mapped out across the board. That gives you a quick identification of that. Um, Not all an even left-right dynamic, because you have Prop 6 and Hockman in there, where the more conservative position ended up prevailing. And some takeaways. Uh, just I was super tempted to put together some sort of a like make up some sort of formula for how to chart out who our most progressive and most conservative members are. But one, want to wait until we have a more diverse uh, list of issues in front of us. So want to look back at previous races from 2022. But there's some clear things that you can draw just from the data we've looked at. And that is, on the left side of the spectrum, Council District 13 far and away is our most progressive council district. District 12 is the most conservative. 12 is not a surprise, but you really did have to wonder, is District 13 or 1, the most progressive district? And it definitely gives an edge to District 13. The big surprise was seeing District 10 in there. And I was surprised to see how high up Heather's district was on a lot of these issues. Councilmember Blumenfield, easily one of the three most conservative. Councilmember Rodriguez in there. Worth noting, District 3 is on the ballot, open race in 2026. This is a pretty conservative district, and if you're running on abolishing the police, you're not going to win in District 3. Just telling you. It just not going to happen. Not to say you can't push the envelope on some of those issues, but you have to appreciate who the voters are, and does this candidate and their message resonate with that electorate. You got to win 50%. One takeaway from this all was how lucky Heather Hutt is that she faced Grace Yu in the runoff this November and not Pastor Eddie Anderson or Aura Vasquez. They were two candidates running to her left, who, if they were on the ballot against her this November, that would have been a dogfight. And instead, she had a cakewalk because her opponent was to her right. Councilmember Nazarian finished in a much tighter race than anybody expected. Most people would have guessed that he would, maybe wrap the thing up in March and not even face a runoff. And he not only faced a runoff, but a very competitive one, even though he had all the financial advantages in the world. And since then, he's really, tried to make some overtures to the left, and he signed on to the eviction moratorium rent freeze motion with Soto Martinez and Hernandez this last round. And I think the data kind of explains that. It was always clear that he had the most progressive Valley district out of all of the districts that are completely encaptured in the Valley. But it was surprising to see just how much of an outlier it is compared to the rest of the Valley. Um, Councilmember McCosker, a pretty damn conservative district in a lot of ways. And if anybody's looking towards 2026, I beyond the fact that he is beloved and he loves the 1-5 and everybody loves how much he loves the 1-5, um, you're gonna have a tough time getting somebody to the left of Tim McCosker, because even though he was coming in as a former police union lobbyist, he has, been notably to the left of where many folks expected coming into his swearing in. Councilmember Yaroslavsky is another one where I don't know if you're going to be able to get anybody to her left through that district. So, District 11, that was a fascinating one to just see on certain issues like Prop 6, Prop 36, even with Nathan Hochman, yet that district overwhelmingly supported Hochman and supported Prop 6. However, um, just relative to the rest of the council districts, there's a lot more pause than some might assume. And I think that's in part because District 11 is a pretty polarized district, and that it has some very passionately lefty people and a lot of passionately rightward people. So it can make for some interesting results there. And I think that's in part why um, Tracy Park is going all out and trying to build up a war chest for her reelection. Um, all of the charter reform measures for the city, Measure G, they really do indicate a strong appetite for reform. Um, we are waiting for a charter reform commission to get off the ground if Mayor Bass will ever make her appointments. But at least from the voters, there clearly seems to be a big appetite for reform, in particular in the city of LA. Few things, just to kind of note, other additional maybe policy takeaways. Um, it would be great if our city clerk put this kind of data together. Maybe not on all of this stuff, but at a minimum, putting the percentages in and putting turnout in and providing some sort of report on what happened in our elections, beyond the bare raw numbers, that would be great. Unfortunately, when we moved to having the county administer our elections, the city clerk kind of um, shed themselves of all responsibility, and that's kind of unfortunate. There, as part of DD, Measure DD, there is a city data bureau that's supposed to be erected at some point, and that would actually be really helpful to have, because that might be a better body to provide some sort of analysis of our elections, but also even just demographic data about our city. Um, the LA Chamber of Commerce used to produce an annual report via Beacon Economics on city council district data. And yes, it's the Chamber of Commerce, but it's better than anything else we got there. And we haven't had it in years since the redistricting cycle. But you can go find those reports from 2020. I believe 2019 might have been the last year they did it. And very, very different district lines for parts of the city, but very similar district lines to now. So just being able to compare educational attainment, um, median household income, um, unemployment rates, all that kind of data, development data, that stuff would be really helpful to have for us to be able to compare with this other data we've got on individual council districts. So I'm assuming maybe the Civil and Human Rights Department might have something that they've put together, but being able to have more data breaking down, the density of renters by a council district. Those kinds of things would be very helpful to look at as we compare to support for rent control or building affordable housing. Um, Last thing is on turnout, and that's just to say that we got to do better. And part of the hope when we moved to higher turnout elections was because we would be spending less money on administering the elections, we could take that money to have the city clerk focus on boosting turnout. And that's something that they never picked up. Um, and that money has just been absorbed back into our budget. And it would be nice to think about, things we can do at a county level to boost turnout. Maybe making some crowdsourced I voted stickers, which is something many cities have done across the country to help boost turnout. That's small stuff, but like I think there is a whole lot more we could do to target certain council districts and boost turnout there. So it is worth looking back at the 2013 Municipal Reform Commission and all the recommendations, and as a city, maybe wondering, is this is this like it feels kind of icky that you know majority of our votes are being produced from a small window of our council, and a small part of our city, and that some districts have turnout nearly half that of others, and for some of these measures we would have a different outcome if we had 5-10% higher turnout in some of our other districts. So uh, with that, I think this is our last slide. Thank you all for hanging in there. Um, Ross, anything to add or to close us out?
Nothing in particular other than what I already mentioned just during Measure A, that there still remains enormous support, I think, not just on homelessness, but as you just said, Rob, in regards to expansion and reform, there is a real desire and will and support for measures to try to improve conditions in the county and in the city. And that is good news, and we could stand to hear more of that.
Yeah. Uh, Depending on appetite and timeline, I hope that I can talk Ross into helping me with some maps, or at least I'll maybe know how to do it on my own after sitting through the teach-in next month. But we do eventually want to take a look back at some of our previous measures, like we had the Healthy Streets LA measure a year ago that was on the ballot. That would provide some great data. We had the mansion tax in 2022. That will provide some great data. We had some measures on the ballot in 2022. In addition to that, we had our city attorney race, we had the controller race, we had the mayor's race. So do want to kind of look back at some of that other stuff so we can build a bigger universe of results and maybe plot out um, a bit more of a concrete way of weighting the left and right positionings of the electorates of all of our respective council districts. So more to come. And if there's any race or measure that I did not mention there that you think is really interesting, we got to include, let me know. If there are any corrections on the spreadsheet, please feel free to email unrigla@gmail.com. Any questions, clarifications, please feel free to reach out as well. It's a whole bunch of stuff, and we did our best to clean up as much as we could, but I'm sure there is something silly that I messed up or forgot somewhere. So Big or small, please feel free to reach out. And we will follow up on our next meeting, maybe the 12th